I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 13, and still today I'm the healthiest, strongest, probably leanest, and definitely most confident version of myself or Philip that I've ever been in my life. So today I would like to share the 10 most valuable lessons that I got from living with type 1 diabetes in all those years, at least the ones that mattered to me the most looking back at it right now. I would say lesson number 3, number 7, and number 10 are the most interesting and maybe controversial ones. So let's jump right in it with lesson number 1, which would be that your body remembers. Your body keeps score of whatever you're doing. Might be a one that sounds quite straightforward, but what a lot of type 1s, including me, are doing in the first weeks, months, and worst case even years, or worst case even decades after the diagnosis, is ignoring it, not taking proper care of it because they're angry about the diagnosis, they don't want to accept it, and they're not taking care. But you will pay that back with health debts, right? You're just building up health debt in a way. So go ahead, take care of it right away. And luckily for me, I was in between. I know about a lot of type 1s that have been ignoring it for years, which is the worst thing to do, of course. But that's the first one. Your body remembers, your body keeps score of what you're doing. And what this reminds me of this research field of epigenetics, right? We know since a couple years, and even like a couple decades ago, we were still thinking that genetics only work in a way where we get our DNA from our parents. And it's of course slightly changed compared to our parents, obviously. Our DNA is a bit different, and then it's again changed when we have children and so on. So from generation to generation, it's being changed. But meanwhile, we know with epigenetics that that our DNA is changing every single day, every single second of the day, and it's adapting to what we're doing. So just to show, whatever you're doing has a lasting effect, not just for type 1s, but generally, whatever you're doing has a lasting effect on you, your genetics, and your health, and you're paying back that debt later on. So, right, don't damage your health with just ignoring your disease. Simple first lesson. Second one is that knowing isn't doing. Also sounds quite straightforward, the typical just do it, right? But this is not about the typical just be disciplined, but still, right? Most of the times we know not every nuance, not every detail, and we don't know all the solutions to our health problems at all times. But a lot of times we know what we would need to do to get the ball rolling, to at least make some progress. It doesn't need to be knowing the solution to every single health problem that we have, but at least we more often than not know what we could start with. So we do our research when we get diagnosed. That was the case for me, at least. I did my research, I learned about it, but I was still a lot of times a bit lazy about waiting, about like actually taking my bolus, my injection 10-15 minutes before my meal, or even a bit longer time before my meal, so my blood sugar isn't spiking. So a lot of times I was a bit lazy about the whole thing, and actually just being consistent with it and having your sweets when you're having a dessert 15, 20, 30 minutes after you're injecting, depending on, of course, what's your blood sugar before you take your insulin, is something I a lot of times didn't do. So execution a lot of times is more of a bottleneck than knowledge, right? Of course, nowadays we know that with AI, search engines, and everything out there, that information is not the limiting factor anymore, but still, right, it's important to mention implementation and actually doing stuff a lot of times is more important than the knowledge itself. That would be lesson number 2 for me. Lesson number 3 is really important in my opinion, which is that you have to learn to feel your body before the sensor tells you. And since I've known, I had quite some friends with type 1 diabetes, and I got to know a lot of other type 1s, of course, throughout the whole journey as well. And what I realized is that a lot of type 1s actually don't realize it. They're like surprised by their sensor telling them they have too low sugar, or someone else telling them, oh, you're angry, you're a bit impatient, you're sweating, you look so weird, like what's going on? But for me, and that's really not to brag, I would really like strongly encourage you to also learn about your body and realize when your blood sugar goes low as well. I always, not right in the first years, but pretty soon learned to feel when my blood sugar was too high or low, and would even be able to guess what my blood sugar is. If you ask me, I would be able to give you a pretty accurate number. Of course, not specifically, and if it's super high, I probably won't be able to tell you if it's 250 or 400. In some cases, yes, but just feeling like listening to your body. And to me, honestly, this has been life-changing because a long time throughout my life, I have been living alone. And when your sensor is not working, which happens sometimes, and you go like super low at night, you have to be able to wake up. And I was always waking up from low blood sugar. I was never like, I don't know, just crashing out, and in the morning people would find me with low blood sugar, half dead. But I would always realize that by myself. I would wake up at night, I would feel it throughout the day when it's too high, when it's too low, and be able to react. And that's something that I only learned throughout the journey. And I would say, right, if you like, oh, I just don't feel it, I don't know how to do it, it's just a matter of actually paying attention. Just like with so many things in life, it's not necessarily that there's a secret to it. You just pay attention to how you're feeling, because if you always do that, like, okay, right now my sensor tells me I'm high or I'm low, how am I feeling in that moment? And when you learn to associate the feeling with a certain number, then you will start to learn like how it feels to be at a certain blood sugar, right? And then you're like, oh, I just have like this slight feeling. I'm not even sweaty yet, or I'm not even angry or impatient yet, and I already know it's low. So that's a big thing. And talking about that, and we'll soon progress with lesson 4. But talking about that, one thing that comes to mind, I lived in a shared flat, in several shared flats in Stuttgart back when I was studying. And what was interesting is that my flatmates back then, in one of those flats, they told me they have lived with a type 1 before me. So the one that moved out of that shared flat before me was also type 1 diabetic, and then I was too. And after a couple months, they told me, hey, Philip, by the way, you're doing so well with your type 1. And I'm like, hey, how do you know? And they're like, we had this flatmate before you, she was also type 1, and she was actually angry or super pissed off, and she was like getting mad at us almost every single day. And I was like, okay, interesting. So there is a lot of, it seems like a lot of people are really not managing it that well. And then others have to live with the consequences of their behavior and them not feeling good. And of course, that's something individual, but then really, I think the first thing is really understanding yourself and being attentive to how you're feeling, so you don't have to suffer from the disease that much. Also, your environment doesn't suffer from it that much. So that's a big one for me. Lesson number 4 would be structure over discipline. So I'm really big on this one, because if you're always just forcing yourself to follow specific things, at some point your motivation will drop. If you had like a couple bad nights of sleep because of a lot of stress and traveling and I don't know what, of course you can always tell yourself to be motivated, but there's other phases in life, or always, right? So if there's a phase in life, and I promise you that will come, I'm not saying that you can't be always disciplined. Big fan of discipline as well, but you also want to create a structure that survives phases where you have less discipline, because your preferences will change. You will focus on other things. You will change in ways that you don't even know about yet, of course, right? Because there's always change that we're going through as human beings. So creating a structure always is more important than the discipline in the first place, which means having a certain discipline in place when it comes to how you're eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, working out. So creating the structure and knowing how to approach things, in my opinion, is non-negotiable. Not getting into detail here, there's plenty of content around how to build such a structure on my Instagram or also podcast here. But this is like a general thing that I really find very important. The 5th thing is a more like mindset related one, which is again another reason why to me like such a diagnosis can be as well also like a secret superpower for anyone that gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which is you have to learn to be weird, right? Because of course you're weird, like you're the one suddenly injecting stuff or pricking your finger to test your blood sugar, or walking around with the sensors, right? I'm being called transformer a lot of times in my practice session, in my training sessions. So like acknowledging that people will laugh about you, people will find it weird, and not necessarily you as a person, but just the fact that you have diabetes, or that you walk around with the devices that you're walking around all day, which in the beginning, right? I mean, it's annoying. I think we all find it annoying. Everyone with type 1 diabetes finds it annoying at sometimes. But being able to just stand that, being able to be different and accept that you're different is a really big one for me, because I like to mention other stories from my life. for example, walking around barefoot for 1 year. I did that for one full year, including winter in school, because back then I was following a YouTube channel and they said it's healthier to walk around barefoot, like back to the roots, back to nature. And I was thinking, oh yeah, that's the thing now. And I would just walk around barefoot for 1 year. And now I know, even from a health perspective, it didn't even make a lot of sense, right? Of course, there's a point to it, but it didn't make much sense. And it was a nice lesson if I look back at it, because I was really at this strong will that when I think something is right, I'm doing it. And I have to say, in my opinion, a lot of people don't have that skill. A lot of people are just doing whatever is the norm, what society accepts, and they don't want to stand out because they're uncomfortable. And that, I think, is not good, right? If you want to be yourself, if you want to live a happy life, a fulfilled life where you know you're the one leading from the front, you're the one that is an inspiration for others in your environment, you can't be that person if you can't even take others finding you weird or mocking you a bit here and there. So with type 1 diabetes, you're forced to build that ability. You're forced to accept to be mobbed, so to say, right? To be made fun of and these kind of things. And right, still doing your thing and not letting letting other people talk you down is a big skill. So this one is lesson number 5, and really important on the mindset side of things. The next thing would be also more of like a mindset angle, which is that the part that I talked about earlier, which is super important, the fact that you accept that condition. This is important, but it's only where things start. So you accepting what's actually going on is the baseline for then being more constructive about it and making a change, being consistent, and actually being healthier. So the acceptance is just the start of the whole journey and just allows you to actually start being healthier, do your research, and so on and so forth. So while it's super important to accept the condition, that's not everything. You can't build on just denying it. You can't build on just not acknowledging it, ignoring the disease, and so on and so forth. So accepting it is super important, but it's also just the baseline, right? And I think really like elevating your standard here is super important. Not allowing yourself to even live with a mindset of I would ignore my disease or I don't acknowledge it. It is what it is, so deal with it and make the best out of it. So this is really a basic one, but it's still super important to understand. It's kind of the same than the first or second one that I mentioned, but still super, super crucial that you need to accept, and from then on build up from there, improve the blood sugar from there, and so on and so forth. The seventh one is again like a physiological one and super, super crucial, because we need to understand that as type 1s that we are having such a higher stress baseline than other people. And that is something that you need to understand, because blood sugar fluctuations, and right, if we're being real, there's no way around our blood sugar fluctuating at times more than the average person at least. This means stress to the body, right? If our blood sugar is dropping, your body is automatically reacting by increasing cortisol, our stress hormone. Also, the fact that we have an autoimmune condition going on in the first place, that means that there's a constant inflammation, a constant autoimmune reaction in our body going on, which also means, right, that we generally just have more stress, more inflammation in our bodies. Another big thing, and like I'm separating these systems, but it's more or less the same. So, for example, we know that if our blood sugar rises beyond 180, if we use the milligrams per deciliter units, if it rises beyond that, then our body, we have more inflammation in our body. So we know that inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha, interleukin 6, and inflammation is being increased in our body. And that for many, many days after that happened once. And that's just 180. And as type 1s, we frequently have our blood sugar rise beyond 250, right? And that's not even something super rare, especially if we had the disease, the condition for 5, 10, 15, or even more years. So that's a really big one. The blood sugar fluctuations are a huge stressor to the body. They directly increase inflammation. And so this is something that you should really, really, really watch in your day-to-day, how much stress you're taking at work when you're working out, but even just knowing that your baseline stress is higher, and that you really should value your recovery, your sleep, and these kind of things, and also accept if you're not able to recover as quickly as someone else, which I have a really hard time doing. But this is just something really important. The fact, that's lesson number 7, that our stress baseline is just higher. So we need more recovery. We need more recovery. That's important to understand. That's already it. We need more recovery, and we need to learn to accept that. Lesson number 8, also super crucial one, is that the hardest health work is the emotional and not the physical, which also goes hand in hand to an extent with the one that I just mentioned. The fact that we have a higher stress baseline, because comparably, the food, the training, the sleep is the easy part. What's super tough about the type 1 diabetes is the whole emotional stressors that are going on beyond that then also affect, again, the physiological side. And what I'm referring to is the fact that we are being asked stupid questions all the time, which of course in the first moment is funny, but we're different to an extent. And when people constantly ask stupid questions, this is just annoying, right? Because you a lot of times you explain yourself, then you have to watch certain things. You are at work and suddenly you can't focus anymore because your blood sugar is dropping, and that's just something that emotionally it's just exhausting. It's exhausting. That's something that needs to be acknowledged, so that again this can also be taken into the equation of recovery, so that we allow ourselves to slow down. And just alone, if we look at the stress, the physical stress that we get from having a low blood sugar, and how it also emotionally stresses us, how it puts us under pressure, doesn't make us feel good. And it's literally impossible to always rest enough so that we can cope with the condition very well and always take our time to slow down. Just because we have type 1 diabetes doesn't mean we don't need to work full time, take care of children, take care of family, and so on and so forth. But this is really a big one. And then we could even this emotional work, which is harder than the actual training, food, recovery, and so on. But this is even bigger than that, right? A big part of that would also be that we stay strong in a way of not allowing the condition to become our personality. Because something I see a lot in the type 1 diabetes communities out there, online, offline, wherever, is that they get into what we call a victim mindset, which is that we use that as an excuse. We start using it as an excuse for anything. Like, okay, I couldn't work out because of my sugar. I couldn't finish my work because of my sugar. I have type 1 diabetes, so I'm more stressed, and that's why I'm so mean to you, right? Right, a bit simplified, but that's the idea behind it. But staying strong, and that's what I also would classify under emotional work, staying strong, not letting it define us, is a really, really crucial thing. And there's also something, right, I work on with clients that are coming to me. When I'm coaching clients, a lot of times it's more like the emotional mindset, psychological frame, than it is the actual food training and lifestyle. And that's especially with type 1 clients, a big thing that I see, where I challenge them on these kind of beliefs. And that's what we could call a meta problem that even affects the rest of the journey way more than the whole working on your food structure, training, and lifestyle. So that was lesson number 8. Really, really important work is the emotional one, not just the quote unquote physical work. So number 9 would be that doing what is the right thing to do alone is the only path that compounds. So for me, and that's also something, right, very individual, so maybe that does not apply to you, but I was always doing throughout my life, and some things around when it comes to that were also didn't have to do much with the type 1 diabetes necessarily. But for example, stopping handball when I did that when I was 17, or stopping to drink in the weekend, and having a different circle of friends, the walking at school barefoot for a year that I mentioned. All of these things were things that were the right things to do for me at the right time. So that was what compounds, and it ties into what I mentioned earlier. You need to be able to be the weird one, which we kind of are forced to be with type 1 diabetes sometimes. But right, doing the right thing and always doing what's the right thing for you, this is what compounds. And I'm mentioning that even though it doesn't have to do with type 1 diabetes specifically, because that then also allowed me to manage my health better, and also beyond the type 1 diabetes, be healthier. Because these decisions of choosing new circles, new environments, new sports, and all of these things allowed me to become the person that I wanted to be, choose the job that I'm doing right now, right, helping people with type 1 diabetes and helping women lose body fat and keep it off for a lifetime. So everything that I'm doing nowadays is a result of making these decisions that were right for me. And this is the only path where things start to compound, because if you're postponing decisions when you know something is important to do and you're not feeling good and you have like a bad gut feeling about whatever you're doing, your job, relationship, whatever there is in life, and you're not following your intuition, then you're not allowing yourself to compound in that direction. And I'm also a strong believer in like these areas being intertwined. So finding the right job for you, relationship, approach when it comes to health and fitness. So allow the right things to compound so that you overall as a human being can be at your best and can be healthy. So last but not least, most important lesson for today, at least that was the most important one for me, is that, like a cliche, the condition isn't the limit, it's the way you frame it. And let me elaborate on that, because this is for me like the game changer. At any point in time, I can always choose what I focus on. So when I get diabetes, and that's also a bit, again, intertwined with the other lessons, when I get diabetes, I can focus on what I can't do, what's more difficult for me, what's harder for me. And then I focus on the negative side, so to say, but what I can also focus on is the positive side. For me, it was learning about my health. That's why I'm also framing it the way I did right in the beginning. Got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and now I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I could also say now I have very bad sleep, which is true as well, but I'm not saying it because I'm focusing on the positive stuff. And that's why also my thinking is positive, my life is positive. And so what I'm saying is, yeah, it's like very much like a cliche, but it's still true, it still works, which is that whatever you focus on, wherever your attention goes, that's also how your life will look like. You can have everything in life, and we all know that in the Western world, people are not necessarily the happiest, even though they are the richest and most wealthy, compared to other parts of the world. So just to say that whatever you focus on, you will also experience, right? So you can choose that condition as a lever to make a change. For me, in that example, that's why I'm also framing it the way today I do. It is that I'm being the healthiest, strongest, leanest version of myself, the most confident one, because I learned to work on myself, on my health. And I wouldn't have done that without the diagnosis in the first place. All of that wouldn't have happened, very likely. So that's why, right, the frame and how you think about it is that's your world, essentially. That's literally your life. So you can choose what you make out of, like what you pull out of that diagnosis, of your type 1 diagnosis, and then build your life around it. So you can focus on it. So I'm not saying that you have to say, oh, I'm diagnosed with type 1, that's amazing. No, it's not, right? I would also choose to not be diagnosed if I would have a choice. But still, what you make out of it is the whole story. And that's essentially the 10 lessons. So thanks for listening. Looking forward to the next one. And before you go, just go up, scroll up, subscribe to the podcast, and see you in the next one then.